Have you ever witnessed an event so shocking that it made you question your faith in humanity? Imagine this: a homeless veteran, a man who served his country, ignored by society, left on the streets with no one to care for him. But then, in a twist of fate, something happens, something so unthinkably cruel that it could change everything. A teenager, just another face in a crowded school, walks by this vet. He's careless, rude, and lacks empathy. And just when you think things couldn't get worse, it does. He spits his gum on the homeless man's clothes. But here's where it gets truly chilling. The very next day, the police show up at this teen's school. They're looking for him. What happened in that brief moment? Why did the authorities suddenly get involved? What's the connection between this teen's disgusting act and the law? You might think it's just a random, senseless act of disrespect. But what if I told you there's much more to this story than meets the eye? Something dark, unexpected, and deeply impactful happened after that spit landed on the vet's worn jacket. Something that left a mark, not just on the vet, but on the teenager himself. Now, you're probably wondering, what could possibly happen next? What's the bigger story behind this bizarre event? Well, you're about to find out. Stick with me, because this isn't just about a random act of cruelty. It's about justice, redemption, and an unforgettable twist. The kind of twist that you won't see coming, and one that could change how you view the world around you. Before you hit that skip button, let me tell you this. You're going to want to stay for this entire story. It's not just about the homeless vet or the disrespectful teen. It's about a system, a society, and how one small act can ripple out to affect so many lives in ways you wouldn't believe. You're going to see how this teen's life is flipped upside down, how the police get involved, and how it all leads to a final shocking revelation that will leave you speechless. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. But let's slow down a bit, because before we dive deeper into the chaos that unfolded after that gum hit the vet's coat, I need you to really think about what happened here. Think about this teen for a second. He's like any other teenager you might know, probably doesn't give much thought to the world around him. You know the type, loud, rebellious, and maybe a little too comfortable in their own bubble. But here's the thing, teenagers often do things they don't fully understand. They act without thinking, and sometimes those actions come with consequences they never saw coming. What was this kid thinking when he spat that gum on the homeless man? Was he just being careless? Or was there something more at play here? Did he know, deep down, that what he was doing wasn't just rude, it was harmful? It's easy to write this teen off as just another careless kid who doesn't understand the weight of his actions. But maybe, just maybe, there's more to him than meets the eye. Maybe he was a product of his environment, someone who grew up in a world where respect for others, especially those less fortunate, isn't a priority. And as much as we like to believe that we can understand the mind of a teenager, sometimes we just don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Maybe he felt entitled, or maybe he was simply ignorant. Either way, he made a choice, and that choice would set off a chain of events that none of us could predict. Now, let's take a closer look at the homeless veteran. His life has been full of hardship and struggle. He's a man who gave everything for his country, fighting on the front lines, putting his life on the line for people he would never even meet. Yet, here he is now on the streets, forgotten by many and ignored by most. But in that moment when the gum hit his jacket, he didn't just become a victim of a rude teenager. He became the center of a story that would turn a seemingly small, isolated incident into a deeply emotional and eye-opening experience. This vet, who had seen and survived so much, would find himself at the crossroads of justice, humanity, and something more. The moment that teenager spat on him didn't just hurt. It set something in motion that would leave everyone involved forever changed. So, what happens the next day when the police show up at this teen's school? You might think they're there to talk about the act of disrespect, to teach this teen a lesson about kindness and empathy. But the truth is, the police had a bigger reason for being there. They weren't just responding to a minor offense. They were investigating something far more serious. And the teen? He had no idea what was coming. He was about to learn a harsh lesson, but it wasn't going to be in a way he ever imagined. Trust me, the twist that's about to unfold will leave you stunned. But before I go further, let's pause here for a moment. I want you to think back to a time when you were a teenager. We've all done things in our youth that we regret, right? Maybe we acted impulsively, said things we didn't mean, or made choices we wouldn't make as adults. It's part of growing up, but what happens when the consequences of those actions are bigger than we expected? That's where this teen finds himself. A small act of disrespect turns into something much bigger, something that forces him to face the reality of his actions. And the real question is, how will he react? How will this event shape him, and how will it change the way we view the people around us, especially those we often overlook? This story isn't just about what happened between a teenager and a homeless vet. It's about how our society treats those who are different, those who are less fortunate. It's about the choices we make, the impact they have, and the lessons we learn along the way. It's a reminder that sometimes the smallest actions can have the biggest consequences. And when you think you're just doing something insignificant, you may not realize that it's actually setting off a chain of events that could alter the course of your life and the lives of others. Now, you might be sitting there, wondering how the story ends. You've already seen the police show up at the school. You're curious about what happens next. Is this teen going to face justice? Will he be forced to confront the gravity of his actions? Or is there something else at play here? Stay with me, because the answer to that question will shock you. But before I reveal what happens next, you need to know something else. There's more to this story than just a simple confrontation between a teenager and a homeless man. It's a story of redemption, of learning, and of a society's responsibility to its most vulnerable. And as we move forward, I promise you, you'll see this story in a whole new light. Stay tuned, because what happens next will leave you with more questions than answers, and trust me, you're going to want to know what happens when the truth finally comes to light. As the morning sun rose over the school campus, it was clear that something was off. A strange tension hung in the air, thick with the unspoken knowledge that a storm was brewing. In the halls, students whispered in hushed tones, glancing nervously at the doors. Something had happened, something that had shattered the mundane flow of the usual school day. The buzz around the school was hard to ignore, but few truly understood the gravity of what was unfolding. Among them, one teenager stood at the center of it all, Bradley. He had never been the type to attract much attention, not in the way a star athlete or an academic prodigy might, but today, he was the talk of the school. The rumors had spread quickly. The police were coming for him. No one knew exactly why, but the whispers only grew louder with each passing minute. Bradley wasn't exactly a popular kid, nor was he an outcast. He was just there, quiet, often blending into the background, making him the kind of person you'd forget existed the moment they left the room. But there were things about Bradley that nobody knew, things that shaped his actions more than anyone realized. It wasn't as if he had a history of being a troublemaker, but there was a darkness lurking underneath the surface that not even he fully understood. He had been acting strange lately, distant, maybe even a little cold. His behavior had shifted in recent weeks. Less socializing, more time spent alone, and a growing tendency to get into arguments with teachers. In some ways, Bradley's behavior had been spiraling, but the people around him were too caught up in their own lives to notice the subtle signs of someone falling through the cracks. Bradley had been under a lot of pressure, more than most of his classmates would ever understand. His family was falling apart. His parents, once the picture of a happy, functional family, were now barely speaking to each other. His dad had lost his job months ago, and his mom, struggling to keep things together, had started working longer hours to make ends meet. The strain was showing, and Bradley was left to pick up the pieces. He had always been the good kid, the one who didn't cause trouble or bring shame to the family, but lately, it felt like he was slipping away. Maybe it was the frustration of watching his parents argue all the time, or maybe it was the constant pressure to perform in a world that seemed to be crumbling around him. Regardless of the reasons, something had shifted in him. Something had changed. The night before the incident, Bradley had gotten into yet another fight with his dad, a heated argument about his grades, about his future, about everything. It was nothing new, but that night, it felt different. His dad's words stung deeper than ever before. "You'll never be anything more than a screw-up," his father had said, his voice tinged with frustration and disappointment. Bradley had always tried his best to live up to the expectations of those around him, but that night, after the argument, he felt more alone than ever. That's when he left the house. He didn't know where he was going or what he was doing. He just needed to escape. He wandered the streets aimlessly, his mind racing, until he stumbled upon the homeless veteran sitting in the same spot he had seen him countless times before. The man's face was weathered by years of hardship, and his eyes, though tired, carried a wisdom that Bradley had never understood. But that night, in a fit of anger, frustration, and confusion, Bradley did something he would regret. He spat his gum on the man's coat. It was a moment of mindless cruelty, something he didn't think about. He just acted. It wasn't until the next morning that he would realize the true consequences of his actions. Back at the school, as Bradley tried to shake off the strange feeling in his stomach, he had no idea that his world was about to come crashing down. The police were on their way, but the reason for their visit was still a mystery to him. The bell rang, signaling the start of first period, and he shuffled into his classroom, trying to act normal. But every glance, every whisper from his classmates, made it harder to ignore the anxiety building inside him. He couldn't escape the feeling that something was wrong, but he couldn't pinpoint what. He tried to focus on the lesson, but his mind kept drifting back to the previous night. Was it really just a meaningless act of defiance? Or had he done something far worse than he realized? As Bradley sat there, lost in his thoughts, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the police weren't just there to discuss the gum incident. There was something more, something deeper that had brought them to his school. And as the minutes dragged on, that sense of unease only grew stronger. What was it about that brief encounter with the homeless vet that had caught the attention of law enforcement? Was it just an isolated act of disrespect, or was there something far more sinister lurking beneath the surface? In the days leading up to the incident, Bradley had been acting differently. He'd been hanging out with a new group of friends, kids who weren't the type to stay out of trouble. They had a certain edge to them, a kind of rebelliousness that appealed to Bradley's growing sense of anger and frustration. They were into things he'd never considered before, things that made him feel both intrigued and scared. One of them, Jason, had been particularly persuasive. Jason was older than Bradley, a high school senior with a reputation for being wild and unpredictable. He had a way of convincing Bradley to go along with things, to push boundaries, to do things he never would have considered in the past. It was Jason who had first brought up the idea of making fun of the homeless vet. "Who cares about him?" Jason had said one afternoon as they passed the man sitting on the corner. "He's just a bum. Let's mess with him." At the time, Bradley had felt uneasy, but Jason's words had stuck with him. Was it possible that Jason had influenced him more than he realized? Had Bradley been too eager to fit in with the wrong crowd? But even as Bradley sat there in class, trying to make sense of the situation, there was something else on his mind. Something he couldn't shake. The homeless veteran wasn't just some random person in the street. There was more to him, more that Bradley didn't know. Had he seen something he shouldn't have? Had he been involved in something larger, something that had drawn the attention of the authorities? And why had the police come to the school so quickly? Was this about the gum incident? Or was there something far more serious at play? As the day dragged on, the weight of these questions grew heavier, and Bradley knew that his life was about to change forever. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just about a careless act anymore. He had no idea where this was headed, but he could feel the tension building with each passing second, and deep down, he knew that the truth, whatever it was just waiting to be uncovered. But would he be able to handle it when it came to light? As Bradley tried to wrap his mind around the mounting tension, it quickly became clear that getting to the truth wouldn't be as simple as he had hoped. The more he thought about it, the more questions he had. Why had the police come to his school so quickly? What had really happened the night before, when he'd spat that gum on the homeless veteran's coat? But the answers, it seemed, weren't going to come easily. He'd never been the type to cause a scene, but now, the pressure was building. And as he tried to make sense of everything, unexpected obstacles began to appear, each one pushing him further away from the truth he desperately sought. It started with a simple thing, his phone. That morning, before heading to school, Bradley had gone through his messages, looking for anything that might help piece the puzzle together. He'd texted a few friends the night before, asking them if they had seen what had happened. But when he checked his phone, the messages were gone. He could have sworn he had sent them, but now they were nowhere to be found. He tried refreshing his inbox, even checking his deleted messages, but it was as if the conversations had never existed. At first, Bradley thought it was some sort of mistake, a glitch in the system. But the more he tried to find answers, the more it felt like something, was erasing his trail. It wasn't just his phone either. He had taken a picture of the vet the night before, a blurry shot of the man sitting on the street, his eyes empty, his coat covered in grime. But when Bradley opened his photo gallery, the image was gone. No trace of it. Gone without a single explanation. The unease Bradley felt only grew stronger. It wasn't just bad luck or coincidence anymore. It felt like someone or something was intentionally keeping him in the dark. And if that wasn't bad enough, the people around him started to act strange. Jason, the kid who had always pushed Bradley to act out, suddenly became distant. The once charismatic, rebellious figure who had convinced Bradley to mess with the homeless veteran was now avoiding him altogether. Bradley tried reaching out to him after school, but Jason wouldn't pick up the phone. And when Bradley showed up at his house, no one answered the door. It was as though Jason had vanished into thin air, leaving no trace behind. The more Bradley thought about it, the more it seemed like Jason might know something that had to do with the homeless vet, and he wasn't ready to share it. But Jason wasn't the only person Bradley had to worry about. As the days went by, a dark sense of paranoia started creeping in. People at school began to whisper, not just about the incident with the gum, but about Bradley himself. Something had changed in the way they looked at him, something that made him feel like he was being watched. The teachers seemed to be paying more attention to him in class, as if they knew more than they were letting on. Even his closest friend, Marcus, had started acting strange, offering Bradley advice that seemed both cryptic and unsettling. "You need to let this go," Marcus told him one afternoon, his voice low and serious. "You don't want to get caught up in all this. Trust me, it's better if you just forget about it." Bradley had never heard Marcus talk like that before. It felt like a warning, but why? What was Marcus trying to protect him from? What was really going on? Bradley's gut told him something was wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on it. His instincts screamed that there was a deeper story here, one tied to the homeless veteran, and one that involved more people than he could have imagined. As the days went by, he began to question his own sanity. Had he missed something? Was he overthinking it? Maybe Jason was just avoiding him because he didn't want to get into trouble. Maybe the missing messages and photos were just a freak accident. But the more Bradley tried to convince himself that everything was fine, the more things seemed to spiral out of control. Then, one evening, as Bradley was leaving the library, he bumped into a man in a long coat. At first, it was nothing more than a casual encounter, but the man's gaze lingered a little too long on him, a strange, unreadable expression in his eyes. Bradley tried to brush it off, but as he walked away, the man's voice stopped him in his tracks. "Be careful, kid," the man said, his tone low and almost threatening. "Some things are better left alone. You're digging into something you don't understand." The words sent a chill down Bradley's spine, and he turned back to look at the man. But by then, he had disappeared into the shadows. What did the man mean? What was he warning him about? It felt like a clue, but to what? Who was he really, and why was he so concerned about Bradley's investigation into the veteran? Bradley's mind raced. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was trying to stop him from uncovering the truth, that the closer he got to the real story, the more dangerous things would become. But why? What was so important about the homeless vet that people, strangers, even, were willing to go to such lengths to keep him quiet? Was the man more than just a homeless veteran? Was he hiding something bigger than anyone realized? As Bradley tried to unravel the mystery, more questions kept popping up. Where was Jason? What did Marcus know? And who was the man in the long coat? The deeper Bradley dug, the more layers of secrecy he uncovered. People were lying, hiding things, and steering him away from the truth. And yet, with every dead end, the tension grew. Bradley could feel himself being pushed into a corner where the answers he sought seemed impossible to reach. By now, the situation was spiraling out of control. There was no turning back. Bradley had no choice but to keep digging, no matter how dangerous it seemed. But just when he thought he was getting closer to the truth, something happened that threw everything into chaos. A key piece of evidence, something he had just found, disappeared, seemingly without explanation.
Gone.
And with it, the final clue he needed to connect the dots. But who took it?
And why?
The question now wasn't just about the gum incident or the homeless vet. It was about something much bigger, something deeper and darker than Bradley had ever imagined. And as the mystery unfolded, one thing became certain: nothing was as it seemed. As Bradley tried to make sense of the latest twist, he couldn't shake the overwhelming feeling that things were slipping out of control. He thought about the missing evidence, the man in the long coat, and the cryptic warning he had received. But there was something even more unsettling simmering beneath the surface, something he hadn't expected: the sudden involvement of someone close to him. His older sister, Jenna, had always been a constant presence in his life. She was tough, independent, and had a way of seeing through the noise that Bradley often found hard to navigate. She wasn't just his sister. She was also his closest confidant, the one person he could trust to give it to him straight. So when she came to him late that night, her face pale and her voice shaky, Bradley knew something was wrong. "Bradley," Jenna started, her hands trembling as she held up her phone. The screen flashed a strange, unfamiliar message: "Stay out of this. The past is buried for a reason." At first, Bradley thought it was a prank, maybe someone from school messing with her. But when Jenna showed him the message's sender, his stomach dropped. It was from an untraceable number, with no name attached, just a string of numbers and letters. "What is this?" he asked, but Jenna didn't have an answer. She was visibly shaken, her eyes wide with worry. "It's the same thing that happened to me, Bradley. I've been getting these strange messages for days now. And I don't know who's sending them, but they're not just random. Someone knows I'm looking into what happened with the vet, and they don't want me asking questions either." Jenna had been involved in her own way, though Bradley hadn't known it at the time. She'd always had a curiosity about the town's history, particularly about the unsolved mysteries and strange disappearances that had occurred over the years. It was something she never spoke about openly, but she'd been digging around, quietly investigating the connections between the old rumors and the people who had disappeared. And in a way, her curiosity had started to intersect with his own. She'd been on the fringes of the investigation without even realizing it, her research unknowingly paralleling Bradley's growing obsession with the vet's mysterious background. And now, the messages, the threats, everything felt connected. It was as if someone or something was trying to keep both of them in the dark, forcing them to walk away from the truth. But what was the truth? Bradley's mind raced. Who was behind the messages, and why was Jenna being dragged into this? She wasn't involved in the original incident with the gum. But in the past few days, her own investigation had started to touch on a hidden chapter of the town's past, one that tied back to the very place where the homeless vet had been seen. It wasn't just the gum on his coat or the disrespect Bradley had shown. It was something far deeper, a dark undercurrent that had been silently flowing beneath the surface for years. The vet wasn't just a random figure on the street. He was part of something much bigger, something far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. That night, after the conversation with Jenna, Bradley couldn't sleep. He kept replaying her words in his mind, trying to piece everything together. His phone buzzed in the darkness, a message from an unknown number. He didn't even want to open it, but curiosity got the better of him. When he did, the message was short but chilling. "You're asking the wrong questions. Stop digging, or you'll regret it." It felt like a threat, a serious one. And that was the moment Bradley realized that whatever was at the heart of this mystery, it wasn't just about him anymore. It wasn't even just about Jenna. It was bigger, more sinister, and someone was willing to go to extreme lengths to make sure they didn't uncover the truth. The police weren't the only ones interested in what had happened with the vet. There was a whole network of people who didn't want this story to see the light of day. They were willing to do whatever it took to make sure it stayed buried. But then came another unexpected twist. The next morning, Bradley received a call from a number he didn't recognize. It was a local news station, and the voice on the other end was familiar, yet unsettling. "Bradley, we need to talk," the reporter said, their tone low and urgent. "You don't know me, but I've been following your story. The thing you're investigating? It's bigger than you think. You're about to uncover something that will shake this town to its core." Bradley was stunned, unsure whether this was some sort of joke. But the reporter continued, his voice growing more serious. "You need to meet me. If you want to find out what really happened, I'm your only chance. Trust no one else." The message sent a jolt of adrenaline through Bradley's body. Who was this reporter? How did they know what he was digging into? And why was he being told to trust no one? There was no way he could ignore this lead. But at the same time, something about it didn't sit right with him. Was this just another attempt to get him to stop looking into things? Or was it a genuine opportunity to finally get the answers he needed? As Bradley wrestled with the decision, his sister, Jenna, reached out to him again. She'd been getting more messages too, but now they were even more disturbing. "It's happening, Bradley," she told him over the phone. "I found something. A connection I didn't expect. But you need to be careful. Someone's watching us." She hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I think I know who's behind it all, but I'm not sure if I'm ready to say it out loud. The more I dig, the more it seems like we've been walking into a trap." Bradley's mind raced as he tried to process everything. The messages, the cryptic threats, the reporter, everything was adding layers to the mystery, but none of it was making sense. Who was pulling the strings behind the scenes? Why was the truth so dangerous? And most importantly, who could he trust? As the pieces of the puzzle started to shift, Bradley knew one thing for sure. The deeper he dug, the more he would uncover. But the question remained, would the truth set him free, or would it destroy everything he thought he knew about the world around him? The stakes were higher than ever, and with every step forward, the shadows of the past grew darker, threatening to consume him whole. The sense of urgency Bradley had been feeling grew exponentially the following night, when everything he thought he knew about the mystery was turned upside down. It started with the feeling that something wasn't right, a gnawing instinct that seemed to follow him everywhere. He had just stepped out of his house, headed to meet the reporter, the one person who claimed to know the truth behind the whole situation. The promise of answers had kept him moving forward despite the danger, but tonight, something was different. His nerves were on edge, and the streetlights around him seemed dimmer than usual, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally. It felt as if someone was watching him, even though he couldn't see a soul. Every time he turned a corner, he'd glance over his shoulder, but the street was always empty. Yet, the unease was palpable, like a weight pressing on his chest. By the time Bradley reached the park near the old pier, where he had agreed to meet the reporter, his heart was pounding in his chest. The area was deserted, save for a couple of street vendors closing up for the night, their stalls dark and abandoned. It was eerily quiet, a far cry from the bustling, noisy park during the day. But as Bradley reached the designated spot, he froze. His phone buzzed again, and he looked down to find another message waiting for him. The words were short, direct, and cold. "Stop now, or you'll never see your sister again." Bradley's stomach turned, his mind racing. Jenna. The one person he trusted above all others. The one person he was trying to protect from all of this. His hands trembled as he typed a reply, but before he could hit send, a sharp noise behind him caused him to whip around. There, standing in the shadows of the trees, was a figure. At first, it was hard to make out who it was, the silhouette too blurry in the dim light. But then, the figure stepped forward, and Bradley's blood ran cold. It was Jason. The same Jason who had disappeared from his life for days, the one who had warned him to stay away from the whole situation. But now, he was standing there, looking more disheveled than Bradley had ever seen him. His eyes were wide, and there was an almost frantic energy about him, as though he was desperately trying to get away from something. "Jason?" Bradley asked, his voice shaky as the reality of the situation began to settle in. Jason didn't answer at first. Instead, He looked around nervously, his eyes darting from side to side, before he finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You need to leave, now. This is bigger than you think. I can't help you anymore." The words hit Bradley like a punch to the gut. Jason had always been a troublemaker, but hearing him speak in such a terrified tone was unlike anything Bradley had ever heard. It was clear now that whatever was going on was far more dangerous than he had anticipated. But before Bradley could respond, Jason's eyes went wide, and he grabbed Bradley by the arm, pulling him away from the park. "Get out of here," Jason said urgently, practically dragging Bradley towards the exit. "You don't know who you're dealing with. You think this is about the vet, but it's not. It's about something much worse. They're watching you. They're always watching." Bradley couldn't understand what Jason was saying, his head spinning as the adrenaline surged through him. What was he talking about? Who was they? Was Jason just trying to scare him? Or was there some truth to the warning? And what had happened to the reporter? Why wasn't he here, waiting for Bradley, like they had agreed? Suddenly, a flash of light appeared from behind them, a car's headlights slicing through the night. Bradley's heart skipped a beat. The car was moving quickly, too quickly, and as it neared, Jason shoved Bradley into the alley, out of sight. The car passed by, its windows tinted dark, but Bradley could feel his pulse racing. Whoever was in that car, whoever was following them, knew exactly where he was. Jason's grip tightened on his arm, pulling him deeper into the alley. "I told you to leave," Jason hissed, panic in his voice. "You don't understand. The reporter? The messages? They're part of this. They're all connected." Before Bradley could ask another question, Jason pushed him against the wall, forcing him to stay hidden in the shadows. The tension was unbearable, each second stretching out longer than the last. He could feel the sweat on his forehead, the blood pounding in his ears. The fear that had been simmering underneath everything now surged to the surface, and he realized just how serious this was becoming. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to keep him away from the truth. They were willing to go to extreme lengths to silence him. As they stood there, frozen in the alley, the sound of footsteps approached. Bradley's heart raced as he tried to make out the shapes emerging from the darkness. 2 men. They were moving fast, purposefully. One of them had a hood pulled low over his face, the other, taller and more imposing, scanning the area as they passed by the alley. Bradley barely breathed as they stopped just a few feet away, their voices low and indistinguishable. Jason held his breath, barely daring to move, but the sense of danger was palpable. It wasn't just paranoia anymore, it was real. Someone was hunting them. And then, as quickly as they had appeared, the 2 figures vanished into the night. The tension in Bradley's chest didn't ease, though. If anything, it only deepened. Jason looked at him, his face pale, sweat dripping down his temple. "They're not going to stop, Brad. I don't know how deep this goes, but if you keep pushing, you won't make it out of this alive." The words hit Bradley like a punch, and for a moment, he couldn't speak. His mind reeled, trying to process the gravity of the situation. Jenna's safety, the reporter's disappearance, Jason's cryptic warning. It was all coming to a head. Whoever was pulling the strings was trying to shut him down, to bury the truth so deeply that no one could ever uncover it. But Bradley couldn't walk away, not now. Something inside him refused to let go of the mystery, of the questions that burned in his mind. He had to know the truth, no matter the cost. But as he looked at Jason, as he saw the fear in his eyes, Bradley realized that the truth might not be worth what it would take to uncover it. The darkness surrounding this case wasn't just a shadow anymore. It was swallowing everything in its path. And Bradley was right in the center of it. The danger wasn't just something he could walk away from. It was something that had already taken root in his life, and now it was growing, spreading, threatening to consume everything. The question wasn't whether Bradley could find the truth. The question was whether he could survive long enough to discover it. As Bradley tried to shake off the feeling that he was being watched, a nagging thought refused to leave him. The messages, Jason's cryptic warnings, and the mysterious car, something didn't add up. None of this was making sense. The more he dug, the more layers of confusion piled on top of each other. He had always believed the mystery centered around the homeless veteran, that the stranger's threats were all connected to the vet's tragic past, and perhaps the video had revealed something deeper. But something about this entire situation felt wrong. It was as though he was only seeing pieces of a puzzle, but the true picture was hidden beneath the surface, beyond anything he could fathom. The next day, when Bradley met up with his sister Jenna, he could feel the weight of the past few days pressing down on him. She was quieter than usual, looking distracted, her eyes darting around nervously. Bradley could see it, the same tension that had plagued him for the past few days. But he wasn't expecting what she said next. "You don't know who you're dealing with, do you?" Jenna's voice was low, almost a whisper, as they sat in their living room. Bradley froze, his stomach tightening as the words hung in the air. He hadn't even brought up the case, had barely spoken to Jenna about what was happening, but her sudden change in demeanor felt too significant to ignore. "Jenna, what are you talking about?" Bradley asked, his voice thick with unease. He had always trusted her, but there was something about the way she was looking at him that made him second-guess everything. "I knew this was coming. I just didn't know it would be you." Jenna's words hit like a hammer. Bradley's heart skipped a beat as she locked eyes with him, a strange, almost regretful look in her expression. "I didn't want you to get mixed up in this. I tried to keep you out, but you pushed too hard." "What are you talking about?" Bradley repeated, now desperate for answers. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you warn me?" Jenna hesitated, her gaze flickering nervously toward the door, as though she feared someone might be listening. Then, as if deciding that there was no turning back, she leaned in closer, her voice barely audible. "It's not the vet, Brad. It's never been about him." Her words sliced through the air, and for a moment, Bradley thought his ears were deceiving him. "You've been looking in the wrong places, trusting the wrong people. All of this? It's a setup." Bradley blinked, unable to comprehend what he was hearing. "A setup? By who?" "That's what I'm trying to tell you," Jenna whispered, glancing nervously out the window. "The people you think are helping you, the ones you trust, they've been playing you the whole time." Her voice cracked, the fear in her eyes unmistakable. "Jason isn't who you think he is, and neither is the reporter. Everything you've been led to believe, it's all part of a much bigger game." The shock hit Bradley like a tidal wave. Jason, his best friend, the one who had warned him to stop? The reporter, who seemed to know more than anyone else. Were they all in on this? The questions started flooding his mind faster than he could process them. Why had Jenna been so calm about all of this? Had she known more than she let on? Before Bradley could speak, Jenna's face hardened, her features twisting with something that almost looked like guilt. "There's no way out now, Brad. I didn't want this for you, but you can't back down anymore. They'll come for you, just like they came for me." Bradley could feel his pulse pounding in his temples. "Who will come for me? What are you saying, Jenna?" She exhaled deeply, running her fingers through her hair in a gesture that Bradley had never seen from her before. It was as though the mask she had worn her whole life was slipping, revealing something darker. "You're not the first person to dig too deep. You won't be the last." I didn't have a choice," she whispered. Bradley's confusion was now palpable. "What do you mean you didn't have a choice?" Jenna's voice dropped even lower, her words almost inaudible. "I had to help them. You're being set up to take the fall. You think you're looking for answers, but you're walking straight into their trap. I tried to warn you, but you wouldn't listen. You won't make it out alive if you don't stop now." Bradley's mind was racing. He couldn't even process what she was saying. A trap? Who was behind it? And why hadn't Jenna told him any of this before? Everything she was saying seemed to contradict everything he thought he knew. The pieces weren't fitting together. Why would someone go through so much trouble just to trap him? What was the ultimate goal? Then it hit him, the message. "Stop now, or you'll never see your sister again." Could it be that the people who had been threatening him were actually threatening Jenna all along? Had they known all along that he would dig deeper, that he would expose something they didn't want to get out? Suddenly, everything felt like it was spiraling out of control. Jenna had just confirmed that he was caught in the middle of something much bigger than he could have ever imagined. But the twist came with a realization so terrifying that it made his blood run cold. The people behind this, whoever they were, had always been in control. They knew about Jenna. They knew about his every move. And now, Bradley had no choice but to follow their script or risk losing everything he cared about. The people he had trusted, the ones he thought were his allies, were in on it from the start. The entire mystery was nothing but a smokescreen to keep him distracted, while the true power players remained hidden in the shadows, pulling every string. As Bradley sat there, his heart hammering in his chest, Jenna's words echoed in his mind. He had been so focused on the wrong people, so convinced that the answers lay in the clues he had uncovered, but now everything he thought he knew was called into question. Who were these shadowy figures? What was their endgame? And most chilling of all, why had they allowed him to come so close to the truth? Was it because they were toying with him, or was it because they knew that by the time he figured it all out, it would be too late? The silence between Bradley and Jenna stretched out like a suffocating fog, each passing second heavier than the last. Bradley's mind was reeling, every piece of information colliding in a chaotic storm. Jenna's cryptic words were still echoing in his mind, her warning ringing louder than ever before. But what could he do with this knowledge? How could he possibly trust her now? The person he had always looked up to, the person who had always been the steady presence in his life, was now a stranger in his eyes. She had warned him, yes, but she had also kept him in the dark for far too long. And now, with the stakes higher than ever, Bradley was faced with a choice he never thought he would have to make. His phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Jason, the one person who had been his anchor through all of this until now. The message read, "Meet me at the usual place. We need to talk." Bradley's heart skipped a beat. Was Jason involved in this too? Could it be that the only friend he thought he could rely on had been playing him all along? The thought gnawed at him, the sting of betrayal already starting to sink in. But there was no time to waste on doubt. Jenna's warning still hung in the air, her desperate plea to stop digging deep into something that seemed so much bigger than him. Was he in over his head? He didn't want to think about it, didn't want to entertain the possibility that he might not make it out of this alive. But the fear was there, gnawing at the edges of his thoughts, threatening to swallow him whole. He had to make a decision. It was no longer about uncovering the truth for the sake of justice. It was about survival. And Bradley knew that if he continued down this path, there would be no turning back. The question was, could he live with the consequences of whatever choice he made next? Without another moment's hesitation, Bradley grabbed his coat and stormed out the door, determination setting in his jaw. His mind raced as he drove to the meeting place. Every streetlight that passed, every corner he turned, felt like another tick of a clock counting down to something inevitable. His breath was shallow, his hands gripping the wheel tightly, as if holding on to some semblance of control in a situation where there was none. He had never felt so alone. No one was trustworthy. No one had his back. Everyone was a potential threat, a player in a game far larger than he had ever imagined. When he arrived at the meeting place, a rundown diner on the outskirts of town, the atmosphere was thick with unease. The diner, which had always been a quiet place for Bradley and Jason to talk about their lives, now felt like a scene from a horror movie. The dim lighting, the empty tables, and the distant hum of the refrigerator in the back corner only added to the growing tension. As he stepped inside, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Something was off. He could feel it in the air, the sense that this wasn't just another conversation. It was a turning point, a moment that would change everything. Jason sat in their usual booth, his face grim, his eyes hidden behind the brim of his baseball cap. He didn't look up as Bradley slid into the seat across from him. The silence between them was thick, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavily in the air. Finally, Jason spoke, his voice low and measured. "We need to talk about Jenna," Jason said, his eyes flickering toward Bradley's, finally meeting his gaze. "She's involved in this, Brad. She's not who you think she is." Bradley's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about? You're telling me Jenna's part of this?" Jason nodded slowly, as if the truth weighed heavily on him. "I didn't want to believe it either, but I've been digging, just like you. And I found out something that changes everything. Jenna's been working with them. She's been lying to you from the start." Bradley's mind raced, a wave of disbelief crashing over him. Jenna had always been his protector, his guide through thick and thin. The thought that she was involved in all of this, that she might have been playing him all along, was too much to process. How could she betray him like this? Was it possible? No, that's not true. Bradley shot back, his voice tight with emotion. She's my sister, Jason. She would never. Brad, she's already taken a deal. Jason interrupted, his voice strained. And now they want something from you. You've been too close to the truth, and they're not going to let you keep digging. You have to stop this, or they'll come for you. I don't want to see you get hurt. They're not just playing games anymore. They're deadly serious. Bradley's mind spun, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't want to believe it, didn't want to accept that the one person he thought he could trust could have been working with the very people who had been threatening him. But as the truth started to sink in, the weight of it settled like a stone in his stomach. Jenna, his sister, had been hiding something from him all along. And now, he was stuck in a position where everything he thought he knew was crumbling around him. Then what the hell am I supposed to do, Jason? Bradley's voice cracked, the panic rising inside him. If I stop now, they win. If I keep going, they'll come for me. Either way, I'm screwed. Jason's eyes softened, a flicker of sympathy crossing his face. You have to make a choice, Brad. You can walk away and protect yourself, or you can keep going and risk everything. But know this, if you keep pushing, if you don't let this go, they'll take everything from you. They'll make sure you don't survive. Bradley felt like the ground had been ripped out from under him. It wasn't just about the truth anymore. It wasn't even about uncovering the secrets hidden in the shadows. It was about survival. And for the first time in his life, Bradley realized that sometimes the truth came with a price that could cost him everything he had ever known. As he sat there, trapped in the weight of the decision before him, his phone buzzed once more. This time, it wasn't a message from Jason. It was an unknown number. Bradley hesitated for a moment, his gut instinct telling him to ignore it. But something in the pit of his stomach urged him to open it. He unlocked his phone, his fingers shaking as he read the message. You don't have much time. Your sister has already made her choice. Will you make yours? Bradley's breath caught in his throat. The words were clear. He had reached the end of the line. There was no turning back now. But which choice was the right one? And was the truth worth the price he would have to pay? Bradley felt his heart hammering in his chest, each beat louder than the last, as the weight of the message sank in. The feeling of being trapped, of having no way out, intensified with every passing second. He didn't know who to trust anymore. Everyone he had relied on seemed to be a part of something far larger and more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. His sister, Jenna, was involved, and now Jason was telling him that the stakes were higher than just his own safety. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was a conspiracy that reached further than he could possibly fathom, and he was smack in the middle of it. As he sat there, the weight of it all pressing down on him, he tried to make sense of the message he had just read. You don't have much time. Your sister has already made her choice. Will you make yours? What did it mean? What choice had Jenna made? And who is behind all of this? Was it really just a few shady individuals pulling the strings, or was there something much bigger at play? His mind raced, but nothing made sense. He wanted to scream, to throw his phone across the room, but he couldn't. Not yet. He had to know the truth. Jason shifted in his seat, his expression dark and guarded, his eyes never leaving Bradley. Brad, you need to listen to me. This thing, it's bigger than both of us. They've been pulling the strings for months, maybe even years. I don't know all the details, but it's not just Jenna. There are more people involved, people who have been watching us from the start. Bradley felt a chill run down his spine. Watching us? Who else? Why didn't you tell me this sooner? Jason ran a hand through his hair, frustration written all over his face. I didn't know what I was getting into. I thought it was just small-time stuff, nothing we couldn't handle. But I was wrong. There's a network, Brad. A whole damn network, and they've been operating under the radar for so long, it's almost impossible to track. They have people in places you wouldn't even believe. People we trust, people we'd never suspect. Bradley's mind raced. What do you mean, people we trust? Who else is involved? Jason hesitated for a long moment before leaning in closer. His voice dropped to a whisper, as if afraid someone might be listening. The cops. The local police. Maybe even people higher up. I've seen their names, Brad. They're all connected. And they're protecting each other. Bradley's stomach twisted. His head swam as the realization hit him like a freight train. The police? Was it possible? How deep did this conspiracy run? He had always believed in the justice system, in the idea that people like him could count on the law to protect them. But now, with this revelation, that belief was crumbling, and the world he thought he understood was shattering before his eyes. Jason continued, his voice strained with urgency. There's more, Brad. I didn't want to believe it at first, but it's all connected. The missing vet, the gum incident, it was all part of a bigger picture. They're trying to cover something up, something huge. And the moment you started asking questions, they made you a target. Bradley's thoughts spun wildly. Everything he had uncovered, every breadcrumb he had followed, now felt like it was part of some twisted puzzle. But what was the final piece? And why was he the one in the middle of it? He had no answers, just more questions, each one leading him deeper into a dark, dangerous web that he didn't know how to escape. A sudden, loud knock on the diner door cut through his thoughts, and both Bradley and Jason froze. Their eyes locked for a split second, fear creeping into their gaze. The air in the room grew thick, suffocating. Who could it be? What was happening? Jason's hand shot to his pocket, where his phone rested, and his fingers hovered over it, poised to send a message. But before he could react, the door opened, and in walked two figures, police officers. Bradley's heart dropped. They were here. It was happening. The officers' cold stares immediately fixed on Bradley. One of them, tall and broad-shouldered, walked directly toward their booth, his boots echoing on the floor. Bradley Richards? He asked, his voice sharp and authoritative. Bradley's throat went dry, his mind spinning. Yeah, that's me, he managed to choke out. The officer's gaze never wavered as he pulled out a badge. We need to talk to you. Now. Bradley stood up instinctively, a wave of panic flooding through him. Jason's eyes flicked between the two officers and Bradley, his hand still in his pocket, but his body frozen with fear. This wasn't just a routine check. This was something else. Something bigger. Before Bradley could even speak, the other officer stepped forward, his expression stern. You're coming with us. We have questions about the incident with the vet. And there are a few other things we need to clear up. Bradley's heart pounded in his chest. They had finally caught up with him. The trap was closing, and there was nowhere to run. Jason, what's going on? Bradley whispered, his voice barely audible. Jason didn't answer right away. He stood there, his jaw clenched, eyes darting around the diner as if trying to find a way out. Finally, he met Bradley's gaze, his voice hoarse and urgent. Brad, whatever happens, don't trust them. Get out of here, if you can. This is it. They're not just arresting you. They're setting you up. Before Bradley could respond, the first officer grabbed his arm, his grip tight, pulling him toward the door. Panic surged through Bradley as the reality of his situation sank in. He was being dragged into something far darker than he had ever imagined. The whole town, the police, and Jenna, everyone was connected to it. And now, with no way out, Bradley was about to find out just how far this conspiracy really reached. As the door swung open, the cold night air hit him like a slap in the face. He could barely think, could barely breathe. But one thing was certain. The fight for the truth had just become a fight for his life. And in that moment, Bradley realized there was no turning back. The darkness was closing in, and soon, he would learn just how deep the rabbit hole really went. The darkness felt oppressive as Bradley was led through the cold, sterile corridors of the local precinct. Every step he took echoed in his mind, a grim reminder of how far he had fallen. His body tensed, every muscle aching with the anticipation of what was to come. He could feel it, the weight of the truth bearing down on him. The final confrontation was near, and everything had led to this moment. He had been pushed into a corner, and there was no way out. The officers flanking him, One to his left and one to his right, didn't speak, but their presence was suffocating. He knew they weren't here to help him. They were part of the system that had betrayed him from the very start. This was no longer just about a simple act of cruelty or a misplaced prank. This was something much bigger, much darker. They reached a small, dimly lit interrogation room at the back of the building. The door slammed shut behind him with a deafening clang. Bradley's heart skipped a beat as his gaze shot to the lone figure seated at the table in the center of the room. He could barely believe what he saw. There, sitting with a cold smirk on his face, was Detective Rayford. The same detective who had been involved in every twist and turn of this nightmare from the very beginning. The man who had once seemed like a protector, an ally. But now, as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, Bradley could see the truth. Rayford was the one pulling the strings. "Sit down, Bradley," the detective said smoothly, his voice ice-cold as he gestured to the chair across from him. There was no warmth in his tone, no empathy, just the flat, calculated command of someone who believed they had complete control of the situation. Bradley took a step forward, the truth coursing through him like a jolt of electricity. "You think you can just keep me here, don't you? You think you're going to get away with this?" Rayford smiled, a sinister grin stretching across his face as he leaned back in his chair. "I don't think, Bradley. I know." The words hit like a slap, the final confirmation that everything he had feared was true. Rayford had been orchestrating everything, the gum incident, the homeless vet, the threats, and now, the trap Bradley had fallen into. The detective had made sure to eliminate any possibility of escape, manipulating every move to bring Bradley to this exact moment. The pieces of the conspiracy, the hidden messages, and the strange behavior of those around him, all of it had led to this confrontation. But just as Bradley was about to confront him, to demand answers, the door slammed open with terrifying force, and in walked Jenna, his own sister. The last person he ever expected to see here. She wasn't just a bystander in all of this. She was a part of it. "Jenna?" Bradley's voice cracked, a mix of disbelief and anger flooding through him. "You?" She stood there, her expression a mix of guilt and resolve. For a brief moment, Bradley thought he saw her falter, her eyes flickering with uncertainty, but then, as if steeling herself for what was to come, she spoke. "I didn't want this for you, Brad. I really didn't. But I had no choice. You don't understand. He has leverage on me. On all of us." Bradley felt the air leave his lungs. The betrayal hit harder than anything he had ever felt before. His own sister, someone he had trusted more than anyone, had been working with Rayford. There were no words that could capture the weight of this revelation, no way to explain how hollow he felt inside. The world he had been fighting to uncover, the truth he had been desperately chasing, was slipping away from him. The people he had turned to for help were the ones who had kept him in the dark. And now, they were all part of the same system that had been manipulating him. Rayford's voice cut through the silence, sharp and cold. "This was never about the gum, Bradley. That was just a distraction. This is about power, about control. And I've had it all along." Bradley's fists clenched, his anger bubbling over. "You're telling me this whole thing was about you, about your game? You've been playing me like a pawn all along." Rayford chuckled, leaning forward, his eyes gleaming with a twisted satisfaction. "It's not just me, Brad. It's bigger than that. You think you're the first person I've brought into this mess? I've had people in your life for months, people who've been feeding me information, feeding me your every move. It's all been carefully planned." Jenna, her eyes darting between the two men, finally spoke again. "He's right. I never wanted this. But when you got too close to the truth, when you started digging where you shouldn't, I had to make a choice. And I chose to protect you, by helping him." Bradley's heart sank, the final shards of his trust in his sister crashing to the ground. She had been a part of this from the beginning, feeding information, playing the role of the concerned sister, all while pushing him further into the trap. Then why? Bradley managed to choke out, his voice strained with disbelief. "Why did you let me get this far? Why didn't you stop me before it was too late?" Jenna's face twisted with something that might have been regret, but there was no warmth in it, only the coldness of someone who had been caught in their own lies. "I couldn't, Brad. I had to let you come to this point. It's the only way it works. The only way he gets what he wants." Bradley's mind reeled, but before he could process her words, Rayford stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Enough," he snapped, his voice hardening. "We've played our parts, but now it's your turn." And that's when everything changed. As Rayford reached into his coat pocket, Bradley's eyes widened. Was he pulling out a weapon? Was this the end?
No.
What Rayford revealed was something else entirely. It was a folder, thick, full of documents. Bradley's breath caught in his throat as Rayford slammed it onto the table, his smirk growing even wider. "This," Rayford said, his voice dripping with contempt, "is your final choice. You can walk away from this. You can forget everything. Or you can take it all down. But if you do, you'll never be the same again. And neither will your precious sister." Bradley's eyes flicked to Jenna, her face a mask of fear and guilt, and then back to Rayford. The folder was the key to everything, the evidence that could destroy them all. It was the one thing they hadn't counted on, the one thing that would make everything come crashing down. But as he reached for it, his mind racing with the implications, there was one thing he hadn't expected. One thing he couldn't have foreseen. Before his hand could touch the folder, the lights flickered, the building seemed to tremble, and in that split second, Bradley's world turned upside down. The sound of gunfire rang through the air, followed by the shrill screams of officers rushing into the room. The door flew open again, and in the chaos, Bradley heard one final, chilling laugh. A voice that was all too familiar. It was Jenna. "You were never meant to find out." The room was silent, the chaos from moments before having settled into a thick, heavy stillness. Bradley sat in the corner of the interrogation room, his hands shaking as he tried to make sense of everything that had happened. The gunshots, the desperate shouts from officers, the blinding flash of panic, all of it seemed to dissolve into the quiet, like a bad dream slowly fading into nothingness. As he looked around, it was clear the game was over, but the victory tasted bitter, tainted by the wreckage left behind. Detective Rayford had been arrested, his web of deceit finally unraveled, but the damage was already done. The truth, as liberating as it had been, had destroyed something far more important: trust. And in its place, Bradley was left with the ruins of everything he had once known. Jenna was gone, disappeared into the depths of the system, her role in the conspiracy exposed. For a while, Bradley had believed she was a victim, that she had been coerced, manipulated into helping Rayford. But when the dust settled, when the truth about her involvement came to light, Bradley saw it for what it really was: a betrayal of the highest order. She had been playing a game of her own, just as manipulative, just as cold. The lies, the secrets, everything she had hidden from him, all of it had been revealed in one swift, brutal moment. The sister he had fought so hard to protect had turned out to be just as much a part of the darkness as those who had used him. But despite the heartbreak, despite the overwhelming sense of loss, there was something within him that wouldn't allow the story to end on that note. He had finally uncovered the truth, and it had cost him dearly, but it had also given him something he had desperately needed: closure. As much as he wanted to scream, to curse the people who had betrayed him, he couldn't. There was no more fight left in him. What had happened was done, and no amount of anger could undo it. The case was over, but Bradley knew the implications would last far longer. As the weeks passed and the news cycles moved on to the next scandal, the ripple effects of what had happened would continue to echo through his life. People would forget the details, the faces, the names. But he couldn't forget. He couldn't simply walk away from what had transpired. He would carry the weight of it with him, knowing that the truth was never as simple as it seemed, that sometimes the people closest to us could be the ones who hurt us the most. But there was a flicker of something else in his chest, something that hadn't been there before: resilience. Bradley had lost a lot in this journey, but he had also gained a sense of clarity. In uncovering the conspiracy, he had been forced to confront parts of himself he'd buried deep down. His trust had been shattered, but he wasn't broken. He could move forward not because it was easy, but because he had no other choice. The weight of the truth, as harsh and devastating as it had been, had set him free in a way he hadn't anticipated. And though it didn't erase the pain, it allowed him to heal in his own time, on his own terms. As he left the precinct for the last time, stepping out into the harsh sunlight of a world that felt both familiar and alien, Bradley couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead. He had learned the hard way that nothing was ever as it seemed, that the people we trust can betray us, and that even when the truth is uncovered, there's always more lurking beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered. The questions would never fully go away. There would always be a lingering sense that something wasn't finished, that the last page hadn't been turned. The case was closed, but the story was far from over. The final image lingered in his mind, the one thing he couldn't shake. Jenna's face, her eyes filled with both fear and defiance, as she vanished into the shadows. Had she been truly forced into this, or had she been pulling the strings all along? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, just out of reach. And for a moment, as Bradley stood alone on the sidewalk, the weight of everything hit him all over again. Maybe there were no answers. Maybe some things were meant to remain a mystery. But that didn't stop him from wondering. What if there were still secrets left to uncover? What if, hidden in the corners of his life, there were more people, more players in this game, waiting to be revealed? The truth had cost him everything, but it had also opened up a world of possibilities, a world that Bradley wasn't quite ready to close. And so, as the camera pulled away from him, walking into the unknown, the audience was left with one last, lingering question. Could Bradley ever truly escape the darkness that had followed him, or would the mysteries of his past continue to haunt him, always just beyond his grasp? The answer, like so many things in life, remained out of reach, and that was the most unsettling truth of all.